What's up, guys? Welcome to the channel. My name's Brendan. I wanted to make this video and share my story and experience with long COVID and kind of get into what that journey's been like for me and some of the things I'm doing to recover. But I'll get, there's a lot for that. I still am recovering, but as many of you know, it's a long road. So what happened for me is, I'll go back to the first time I got COVID was August of 2021. I remember I was going to go fishing with a buddy of mine, and I was like, I think his wife was pregnant at the time, and I was like, I said, hey man, I'm not feeling well. I don't want to get you sick. And guys being guys, he's like, oh, come on, bro, you just got the sniffles. And I was like, yeah, you're right, I'll go fishing. So I went fishing with him. Looking back, like, I was definitely off, but I was like, whatever. But the next 4 or 5 days I was in bed. Basically, it felt like there was like 1,000 pounds on my back. Like, I remember my back hurting. And I was just like, I don't think I got out of bed for like 4 days. But even then, which is funny to think, I wasn't thinking to myself, oh, it's COVID. And after the 4 or 5 days, like, I didn't run out and get tested, but after the 4 or 5 days, I was supposed to work a football camp. I was coaching football at the time, the next week. And I said, oh, maybe I should go get tested, because back then it was like you got to quarantine and do all this. So I went to urgent care, got tested. It was positive. I had to quarantine for 11 days. But in my mind, I was like, well, I'm fine, but I guess I'll just stay home for another week. And then that was August, so September, October, November, December 2021, Christmas vacation. I was on break from work. I was going back that following Monday. Sunday night, they sent us an email. They were like, hey, we're going to do voluntary testing in the parking lot. If you think you have symptoms or whatever. So if you asked me on Sunday night, I was like, oh, I'm not doing that. I'm fine. I woke up Monday. I remember I had like a little bit of a sore throat, like felt like I had a cold. So I was like, all right, maybe I'll just take it. So I went to work, took the test in my car. It was positive. And they're like, well, we'll see you next week. You got to go home and quarantine. And I was like, all right. But it was extremely mild. Like, by Wednesday, I was like, I could be back at work, but I guess I'll take the week off. So nothing really came out of that second infection, except for the next 6 or 7 months, my smell and taste were completely distorted. For example, like, everything smelled like chemicals or like burning metal or something. I don't even know how to describe it. Food smelled rancid. I'd walk by a restaurant that I normally love, and I'd be like, everything just smelled foul on like an extreme level. I would drink something that I like, and I'd be like, it just tasted like chemicals, everything. But that was the only thing I had those 6-7 months, and then it went away. Or like, I say that, but now that I have long COVID, I'm like, I don't know. It's not like it was. So for 2 years, I was good as far as I knew. I go back to work last September. September 2023, first week back at work. I was coaching football. Labor Day weekend, we had a scrimmage, and it was Friday. We didn't have work, but I had the scrimmage that day. And I remember going to it, and I was like, man, I'm just not feeling it. Like, something's off. But again, this is 2 years later, so nobody's really talking about COVID, and you're just kind of like, all right, I guess I caught a bug. You know, I'm around a bunch of kids. I have 2 young kids myself. So I coached the scrimmage. I was supposed to go to the North End that night with my wife for dinner. Brought the kids to my parents. They were going to sleep over. My oldest daughter ends up throwing up, so we didn't go. And I was kind of relieved because I had no appetite. Like, I wasn't excited to go. And usually I am. So I was like, all right, we'll just go next weekend. So I stayed home that weekend. Went to work the next week thinking I was fine. And I think it was like the middle of the week. I was coaching outside. I was about to do a drill with the position group I was coaching. And I was like, it was like everything just went like this, like just like slowed down. And I was like, it was like the kids were talking to me, and it was just like slow motion, and I was like feeling like I'm gonna pass out. And I was like, dude, what is going on? I was like, and it was like the weird like doom feeling. And I'm like, I called another coach over, and I'm like, hey, I'm like, can you watch this drill? Like, I gotta like get in the shade or something. So I go in the shade. I'm thinking I'm dehydrated, and I'm just pouring water on my head, but I wanted to get off my feet. I remember that. I was like on a knee, and I'm like, man, this is so weird. And I told the head coach, I was like, dude, I gotta like walk to the bathroom or something and splash water on my face. So I did that. But, you know, again, being a football guy, playing for years, coaching for years, it's like, hey, suck it up. All right, we'll be fine. So I kind of like just chilled the rest of practice, but by the end of practice, I was like, all right. I was like, I'm good. So I go, and I'm thinking, yeah, I was just dehydrated. So the next like 3 days, I'm just pounding water. It was hot out at the time, and I'm like, all right. And then that weekend, I remember the same thing. I woke up on Saturday, and I was like, I had like a sore throat, and I was like, I kept telling my wife, I was like, dude, I think I'm sick again. Like, I don't know what's going on. I was mowing the lawn. I'd have to like stop and sit down. And I'm like, we had some people visiting us that weekend. And I was telling my wife, I said, you might want to tell them, you know, they were traveling to see us. I'm like, you might want to tell them, like, I think I'm sick, dude. I don't want to get them sick. Again, we're not even thinking about COVID at this point. And I was like, you know, again, just chilled all weekend, kind of wrote it out. I go to work Monday, and about mid-morning, you know, I go from feeling normal, then mid-morning, it's like that same thing that happened at football practice, but even worse. I'm like, dude, I'm about to pass out. Like, what is going on? I could barely like talk. It almost like, I was like, dude, am I having a stroke? Like, I was like searching for words. And I texted my wife, and I said, all I want to do is sit down and put an ice pack on my neck. Like, this is so weird. And she's like, oh, because I work at a school. She's like, go to the school nurse. And I'm like, let me just give you the background. And I'm not saying this is a good thing, but I hadn't been in a doctor's office for at least 10 to 12 years. And I was like, all right, I guess I'll go to the nurse. So I go to the nurse. They take my blood pressure. It's high. And she said, Brendan, you don't look good. And I was like, yeah, I just feel weird. Like, I don't know what's going on. Like, and she's like, you should go to urgent care. So I leave, I go to urgent care, you know, tell them the story. They're just like, oh, let's do an EKG. Yeah, we don't really know. You got a little flat T wave, but it's not a big deal. But why don't you go to the emergency room, which was across the street? And I'm like, all right, I go there, you know, blood work, chest x-ray, the whole nine. I'm not saying these people aren't trying to help, but, and again, we're not even at the point of COVID yet. So I'm like, they're like, yeah, everything looks good. The only thing that's weird is since we've been in here, your heart rate keeps going over 100. And I was just laying down on the hospital bed, and I'm like, I looked up at it. I'm like, oh yeah, that is weird. But they're, to them, they're like, you're not dying. So they actually they did do an ultrasound on my stomach, and they said, well, you do look dehydrated. And I probably was not drinking enough water at the time. So I was like, all right, maybe I just got like a weird I kept saying, maybe I just got a weird virus, and I just got to ride this out and like flush it out and drink water. So I go home, and I remember I got home and I was just laying in my bed, like feeling sick. And I remember my mom was here watching my kids. She came in the room, and I kind of broke down. Like I was crying. I was like, dude, like something's wrong with me. I don't know what is going on. And she's like, oh, it's all right. Like, we'll just listen to the doctors, whatever. So Tuesday I called out of work, but it was the classic, like when you stay home sick and just lay on the couch and eat saltines and drink Gatorade. And I was like, and again, I'm like, man, I'm like, maybe I just got a bad flu. Like, I don't know what is going on. So naturally Wednesday comes, I wake up and I was like, all right, I'm going to go to work. So I remember, I'll never forget this. I was brushing my teeth. Like I was literally dressed, ready to go for work. I was brushing my teeth. I go down the stairs, and the same feeling, that same thing. And I was like, my heart was just racing. And I was like, dude, what is going on? Like I look, and at this point, I had never even opened the heart rate thing on the Apple Watch. And I look at it, and it's going like 132 beats per minute. And I'm like, I called my wife's like, now she's freaking out. She's like, you got to go. We're going back to the ER. And I'm like, I called my work, and I was like, I got to go back. Like something's wrong. I'm thinking I have like a heart issue or something. So now I'm like, she's like, all right, let me just get ready and we'll go. I remember walking to her car, and it was like my legs were like cement. Like I could like barely get to her car. Like I just felt like I was going to tip over at any point. And I was like, what? Like, I was like, I don't know what's going on. So I go back, and they're like, we just saw you 2 days ago. And I said, yeah, I know. Like, something's wrong. Like, I don't know what it is. So now I'm starting to think. I'm like, all right, test me for COVID, test me for Lyme, mono, whatever, everything. They actually did a D-dimer, like a test for blood clots. And they're like, yeah, everything's negative. Like, and I remember the nurse, the heart rate thing, and she goes, oh, you might have POTS syndrome. And I'm like, I've never even heard of it. I'm like, what's that? She's like, she explains it to me, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, you can get it from any virus. Some people are born with it. It's common in women during pregnancy. And I'm like, okay. So they were like, why don't you take a week off work, come back next week and do a stress test? Because we're still thinking like they're just trying to say, hey, let's just see if you have a heart issue. So I take the week off work. I go back the next week, do the stress test, which was fine. They didn't see anything crazy, but I asked the nurse, the cardiologist, I said, hey, do you think I got POTS syndrome? Like they were telling me this in the hospital. And she kind of dismissed it right away. She was like, oh, she goes, nah, you would have been born with that. And at that point, I'd done like a little bit of research reading about its connection to COVID. And I was like, okay. She's like, and I'm like, well, what if I have it? And she's like, drink water and eat salt. I'm like, all right. So I go home, and I was like, I don't know what to do. Like, I guess I'll go back to work and coach football and they're like, well, you should get, I had to get a primary care doctor because I didn't have one at the time. So I get that. I go back, it's a Friday where I'm supposed to coach a game that night, and I go back to work, and I will say they very supportive of my situation when I didn't even know what was going on at the time, but they're like, hey, just take it easy. Like, do you want to go to the game? You're going to coach? I'm like, yeah, dude, I'm fine. I'll go to the game. I remember getting on the bus to go to the game. And again, at that point, looking back, like I would sleep and I would wake up and just want to keep sleeping. Like I had no energy, but I had no clue what I was walking into. And I was like, I got on the bus and I just like slept the whole way. I was out of it. I got to the school we were playing, got inside, and same thing. I was like, dude, I gotta sit down. Like, I'm like that weird panic, lightheadedness, and I'm like, I remember being in their locker room, and I looked in the mirror, and I was like, I said, what is wrong with me? Like, what is going on? And I'm like, dude, I got to go outside. I go outside and I'm like looking back. It's like almost like you're on drugs. I'm like walking around and I'm like, this is like, I'm like, I don't know what this is. And I was talking to a buddy of mine there and I'm telling him, and he's like, oh, you probably have POTS syndrome. And I'm like, you're the second person that's told me this. And because he said he had an issue with it a year ago. And I'm like, all right, man, like I guess I'll start looking into this. So I start doing more and more research. Now it's October. I go to the primary care people and I'm telling them. And I said, you know, I remember before I went to the appointment, I'm doing long COVID research. I'm watching videos on YouTube, and everything is kind of like the puzzles are starting to fit together with what I was experiencing. And I go to the doctor and I was like, I think I have long COVID. And they're like, nah. Well, they're like, you tested negative on September 20th, so it's probably not that. But remember, I got sick September 1st. So I never even took a COVID test until September 20th. So I was like, all right. They're like, nah, let's test you for Epstein-Barr virus, and we'll do a panel and da-da-da-da. And I'm like, at that point, I was starting to get a little bit of depression, like, and I have no issues with this. Never been, you know, I mean, yeah, have I been sad before? Sure. But like, this was different. I was like, dude, I don't know. And I was starting to get weird thoughts and like, I'm like, I don't like, this is starting to get weird. Like it started out physical, but now it's becoming like mental. And so one of my best friends at the time, he ends up being in the hospital that same time frame that I was there, and I didn't know till after when I talked to him. And he said, yeah, he was a different presentation of long COVID. They said, hey, you have mono. So I'm like, oh, maybe I have mono, because I had been hanging out with him like 4 weeks before. So I start pursuing that, because I start reading about COVID reactivating Epstein-Barr virus in people, which, like, we all have it in us. It lays dormant, but apparently COVID can reactivate it, which is what I think happened to my buddy. So I'm like, all right, maybe I have that. So I go to urgent care. I'm like, hey, test me for mono. They're like, why? I'm like, I don't know. I think I have it. I'm wicked fatigued, and like it's. So they do some kind of rapid mono test. It's negative. I was like, all right. I'm like, what? I kind of, looking back, I like kind of knew that it was long COVID, but I could never get somebody to tell me like that's what it is. So I was like, all right. So I go back to work, and what comes next was the absolute hardest journey of my life. Like I was basically, it was like I was a zombie at work. Like I'm like teaching, but I'm sitting down, no energy. All of a sudden I'd be in my office during prep, I'm crying. I'd be driving home, like any song would just trigger me. I just started crying my eyes out. Still getting those weird panic attacks. So that it happens a few more times at work. And I'll never forget this. Like the last time it happened, a class came in, I was about to teach, it happened, and I'm like, I'm like, all right, it went away after like 5 minutes, but the next day is when, like, if I had a severe depression button inside of me, it was like somebody smashed that with a hammer. Like, that's when it started getting bad. Like, I remember, like, it's hard for me to say this because even when I deal with it now and people are like, oh yeah, you just got to suck it up. Like, I played football my whole life, played through college, I've been lifting weights since I was 13. Like, I'm all about sucking it up. Like, I never tapped out on anything in my life. So I'm like, now here I am crying, having to figure out why. And I'm like, this is crazy. So I keep fighting through it, which was probably a huge mistake. If I could go back, I would have taken more time off. But again, I didn't quite understand what was going on. So I make it all the way to Thanksgiving. But at that point, I don't even know how I was walking around, to be honest. I had the insomnia. I'd wake up every hour on the hour, or like sometimes I wouldn't even sleep. I'd sleep for an hour and then go to work the next day. And it got to the point where then I was getting the derealization. I'd be down at the field trying to coach, literally almost hallucinating. Like if you took a psychedelic drug or something, and I'm like trying to look at these kids and everything is just like a mess. And I'm like, dude, what is going on? Like, this is crazy. And then I make it all the way to Thanksgiving. The next day, my wife was working downstairs. I went down there. I just I sat down. I just broke down. Like, I don't think I've ever cried like that in my life. And I was like, I don't know what to do. Like, no appetite at that point. I was severely dealing with depression. I was having intrusive thoughts. Stuff, if you told me in August, like, this is where you'll be by Thanksgiving, I'd be like, what are you talking about? So it gets to the point where I'm like, dude, I don't know what to do. Like, I got to seek help because I can't even function mentally or physically. So I go back to the ER, and I was like, you know what? I can't, like, I'm so, like, something's wrong with me. Like, I can't stop having these thoughts. I can't stop crying. I'm so depressed. The panic, the anxiety, the insomnia, So they're like, well, we can send you to a place voluntarily for 3 days. And I tried to fight this for a while, because even the doctors were like, they just see the mental health side of it and say, well, maybe you're just depressed. Maybe you just this, but you know yourself. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm not. Like, I didn't just wake up like this. I was fine in August, happiest guy you could meet. But eventually, by December, I cracked, and I was like, all right, send me to the place, I guess. So I go to this place, which starts me on medication for the depression, some other medication for the crazy. When I say anxiety and panic, this isn't like, hey, I'm stressed out, I have a test tomorrow. This is like, oh my God, I might die in 10 seconds, but you cannot control it. It's just never ending. So I go to this place, and I was like, I'm getting out of here in 3 days. Like, no chance I'm staying here. So they start me on the medication. When I was actually, right before I went in the hospital, I'm like, dude, I can't sleep. They give me trazodone, knocks me out for like 12 hours. And I was like, wow. I'm like, maybe I just needed some sleep because I felt so good when I woke up. So I do that. And then, again, my work was very understanding. I ended up taking like the rest of the month of December off because I was like, they're like, well, what do you want to do? You want to go on medical leave? Like, I'm like, I don't know, man. Like, let me just come back after Christmas break. They're like, all right. So I come back, and I was a mess, dude. Absolute train wreck. Like, I'd be at work. Again, like, I just look back, and I'm like, I don't even know how I was doing this. I would just drag myself. I was like a walking corpse, dude. I'd drag myself to work. Admittedly, like I'd be holding back tears, like trying to teach kids, having bad thoughts, and I couldn't wait for the day to end so I could step outside, get into my car, and just let it all out. And I was like, dude, this is absolutely insane. Like, so I marched through that for another 2-3 months. And I had back pain the whole time, really bad in my upper, like the upper right of my back. And again, I just dealt with it, but then I'm like, you know what, maybe I should get this looked at, because your mind starts going. I'm like, I don't know, is there like a tumor in there or something? So I go back to the doctor, same lady I saw back in the beginning of the story in October. And I'm like, listen, they're like, how you doing? I'm like, this worse than the last time you saw me. Like, I'm screwed. And I'm like, I think I have long COVID, you know? I'm like, I know, like, you guys don't know or whatever. And they said, well, we can give you an antibodies test, but we don't want you to be upset if it's negative, because now it's been 6-7 months. And I'm like, I'm thinking to myself, oh, maybe we should have done this off the rip. But so I'm like, whatever. They take blood out of my arm, send it to a lab for the COVID SARS-2 IgG antibodies. It comes back positive. And I'm like, all right, finally, my hunch was right. Some clarification for me. Like, because even the doctors will just say, well, we can't say for sure that's causing all your symptoms, but, you know, it's just another piece of the puzzle. And I'm not saying that like I'm mad at them or anything, because they listened to me, like, but the reality is they just don't know. They don't know about long COVID. It's only been around a couple of years. So they start, again, now this starts I'm going to cardiologist and trying to fix the POTS thing, and the cardiologists are like not really taking me serious. They're like, who told you have POTS? I'm like, the doctor. At that point, my doctor had confirmed, like, all right, you have POTS, but it was only like, hey, drink water, eat salt. And I'm like, yeah, but this isn't changing any of the mental stuff. So I'm telling the cardiologist, they don't believe me. I had one lady walk out on me, because at that point I was doing so much research. I'm like, look it up. Like, look it up if you don't believe me. And she ends up walking out. She said, oh, have him get another echocardiogram. And I've already done like 2 of them. I'm like, I just did one last week. Like, and I remember leaving there like completely shattered, absolutely shattered. Like, and I would just go on my phone and literally watch football, like pump up videos, and I was like, you know what? I got 2 young kids. If this is my life now, like, I guess I just got to live like this, which was sad. Like, I used to cry myself to sleep and just pray. I was like, this can't be it, dude. Like, I got to figure this out. So nothing really changed. At that point, I was going to talk therapy. I had a psychiatrist. I'm on medication, I'm slowly like doing more and more research, kind of like building a playbook. And nothing really changed for me until probably April. I was on YouTube, came across a podcast. Good friend of mine now. I credit a lot. The beginning of my recovery is when, I listened to this podcast. He's on YouTube. Adam Langdon, a fellow from Canada. He's got a channel on YouTube. I think it's Beating Long COVID. So I started watching a bunch of his videos, and his story was really similar to mine. And he was like, oh, I'm 90% recovered. At the time, this is what I'm doing. So I found him on Facebook. I sent him a message. I'm like, dude, what do I got to do? Like, I just listened to your story, and it sounded like I was listening to myself. Yeah, it's Beating Long COVID on YouTube. Check out his channel. He's got a website too. He's been a huge, massive help to me. So I reached out to him on Facebook. He kind of turned me on, and I had started hearing this from other people too, but he turned me on to the non-inflammatory diet. The amount of stuff is just absolutely insane, but the big thing was the diet. I'm like, all right, I got to do that. Literally changed my diet overnight. Haven't cracked since. Cut out gluten, pizza, fast food, processed sugars, candy, whatever. Anything that you wouldn't think twice about eating, I haven't touched it. Probably since April. It's now August. So that was the first thing. And then little things like cold showers, taking baths in Epsom salts, bentonite clay, all sorts of crazy stuff. Taking olive leaf extract. Like, I'm just, at this point, I'm just finding anything I can find to throw at this. So I do that. I start doing some research on, I said, all right, what's Eastern medicine doing for this? I find studies about acupuncture, helping people with long COVID. Boom. Find an acupuncturist near me. Literally go there the next week. Another godsend. This lady has been doing it for like 35 years. Tell her my story, and it makes sense to her, and I'm like, okay. So I started doing acupuncture. With the first session, I felt improvement. I remember going home that night, and I was like, oh my God, I have energy in my legs for the first time in months. And I was like, all right. So I kept seeing, so the diet and the acupuncture was really the two biggest things that started my recovery, I would say. So I kept going to acupuncture every week, once a week for a while. And then, the diet, everything. And then I progressed to the point where she said, hey, I think you can start coming every other week. Like, you're making a lot of improvements, stay on the diet. I was also started drinking creatine. I had read some studies about that, helping with the brain fog. I forgot to say I had wicked bad brain fog for a long time. So, I was doing that for a while, and I kind of had, you start playing games with yourself. There was at one point I was like, oh, I'm like 90% recovered. Like, I'll be good in a few more weeks. Like, my pot stuff was dying down. The acupuncture did help that a lot. And then, you kind of hit a plateau, and I'm like, all right, like, I'll just stick maybe like another month. I'll be good. But I could never get rid of the derealization. The derealization I had the whole time so bad. If you know, it's like living in a video game. I'd be on the highway driving, and like everything just looked crazy, absolutely crazy. Keep in mind, I still work through this whole thing. I'm working barely. I'm picking up my kids 3 days a week, like trying to like manage my life and like fight this at the same time. And it's to an understatement would be like massive toll on my family life, and like, forget what it's done to me. Like, my wife, my kids, my wife's had to take on so much, and being the only man in my house, like, that sucks, because for a long time you try to convince people like, I'm going through this, and I don't expect them to understand, because they only see the version of you they know. So they, at times would be like, well, you went to work all day. How come you come home and just rest? And I'm like, you have no idea what it took me to go to work. Like, and it does eat at me a little bit. People come over and it's like, oh, he's laying around, like, and his wife's doing this, and, someone's got to mow the lawn. Like, I'll tell you, when you go through this, all that stuff goes out the window, and it sucks. It does. It eats me alive. But, it's like, I can't recover from this and I want to do those things. Like, I always tell people, I'm like, you think I'm choosing to do this? Like, no chance. Zero chance. I mean, I was very active before this. I was going to the gym 3 days a week, like, always having a good time. So I took a supplement called NAC, which is common in the long COVID, long haulers community, because a few people had told me, well, I just kept saying, I think I got everything like kind of under the water here, but I cannot get rid of this derealization. And it was almost debilitating. Like, I hated every second of it. So some people said, hey, NAC helped me, take that. So I took it twice, and it did work a little bit. But the second day I took it, I remember I was laying down with my daughter and I was like, oh no, like that, it's like everything else came back. The POTS, the heart rate, the panic. And I was like, damn it, dude. It was like I traded in the derealization for everything else. And I was like, okay. At this point, I was in month 10 or 11. So I started doing more research. I had been looking at this before and talking to people about getting a stellate ganglion block. There's some research on that helping with long COVID. I found a doctor out in Texas, and a lot of people that saw him and had relief or success. Does it work for everybody? No. They'll never promise you that. Some people say it did nothing. Some people say it was a miracle. So I had a virtual thing with him because at that point it was established, you know, you have dysautonomia, which is the autoimmune, the POTS. And I was kind of like, you know what? If I can get rid of that, I think I can get rid of most of my problems. So I'll take a chance at this procedure and see what it does. So I fly to Texas, and what it is, it's an injection into either side of your neck into a cluster of nerves that sit in front of the spinal cord. And the theory being that when you get long COVID and you're stuck in this sympathetic nervous system, this fight or flight, which is all it is, it's just an overreaction of the immune system. You have all this inflammation causing issues. Because believe it or not, your immune system plays a part in that. So I was like, all right, if I can do this and get some relief on the POTS, like I think I'll be good. So, excuse me, I flew out there. They said, plan to get both sides done because we don't know if you're right or left dominant. I said, oh, I'm right-handed. And they said, no, it has nothing to do with that. It's just whatever goes on in here. So they do the right side first, and I felt relief for like a minute, and I was like, man, all right, this is working. And they're like, all right, we're going to go lay you down, check your vitals. So they lay me down, you know, thing on my finger, check the pulse, everything's cool. They're like, all right, we'll check on you in a bit. Probably 2 minutes later, no exaggeration, this is going to sound dramatic, but the worst fight or flight, panic, doom feeling I've ever... Like, even calling it a panic attack doesn't do it justice, because I was literally gripping onto the handle on the bed I was laying on. Like, it just felt like my soul was going to go, whoosh, fly off the earth. Like literally, I say it now and people are, oh, okay. Like, no, like, I was actually praying for my life. I was like, is this it? Like, I'm literally praying. I'm like, you know, I'm like, God, please don't take me yet. I got to raise my kids. Like, this is crazy. He comes back in the room. He said, how you doing? I'm like, I'm bugging out, man. I'm like, he's like, why? I'm like, I don't know. It's that weird stuff I had in the beginning when I got sick, but like times 3,000 now. And he's like, it's just your system readjusting. You know, it'll go away. Just close your eyes. And it did go away after about 5 minutes, but it was like a roller coaster in hell that you can't get off of. And I was like, by the time I left, I was fine. And I was like, all right. They're like, go home, go back to your hotel, rest, see how you feel. And if you feel good, you don't have to get the left side. And I was like, all right. So I go back to my hotel. I kind of rest and debated all night. I'm like, dude, I'm like, should I do the left side? Do I really want to go through that roller coaster again? Because that was intense. But ultimately, I said, you know what? I flew all the way out here. I already paid for it. Like, whatever. I go there. I do the left side. Completely different. And he said to me, you know, you might be left side dominant if you had that reaction when we did the right side. Because it can trigger that if we hit the non-dominant side first. It sends all the signals to the other side. Whatever. So I'm like, all right. They do the left side. Massive relief. And I was like, I remember laying there saying, I said to my family and friends, I said, I haven't felt like this in 11 months. And I just think to myself, this is literally insane. Like let me say, I am grateful and blessed that I'm alive and have a chance to correct this, because there is people worse off than me. There's people that died from COVID. So I'm like, all right. In that regard, like I'm lucky. Definitely lucky. Like, and I always say, listen, I understand it could be worse. you have to deal with that too when your friends and people are like, well, Johnny had this and he beat it, and it's like, all right, I'm not like discrediting anyone else's life journey and experience. I'm aware bad things happen to everybody, and I'm aware there's people, well, it could be way worse. There's people in way worse situations. I'm totally understanding of that. So I felt massive relief from the left side. And they actually stick stuff in front of your nose. They're like, what is this? And you got to smell it. And I'm like, everything smelled so potent. I'm like, oh, that's coffee. That's mint, whatever. And I'm thinking, oh, maybe my smell was messed up. Like, and then I remember being at the airport flying home, and I could smell perfumes, and like, I was not smelling that when I flew out there. So I flew home, and I felt good for a few days, and then it started being up and down again, and I was kind of like bummed out, and I'm like, maybe is this already wearing off? Because I didn't know this at the time, but the longer you wait to do something like this, the harder it is to like unstick that sympathetic nervous system. So some people have to go back and get 2 or 3 of them, but a lot of people I talked to were, and even the place called me, and I'm like, dude, it's kind of up and down. Like the pot stuff is back, like. And they're like, you got to wait a week, wait 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month. Everyone's different. Some people I've talked to, they didn't feel the full results of it until a month later. So this Thursday will be 3 weeks for me. It's definitely like, it was a good decision for me. 100%. I'd do it a million times over. And it is still a little up and down. But again, it's like this. This is all it is, recovering. It's just a slow progression. It's not linear. And I have to remind myself of that, because I still have days, I still have hours where I'm completely down, and I'm just like, dude, I don't, like, how am I going to beat this? So I'm remaining optimistic. I'm kind of tracking where I'm at every week after the procedure. This week will be 3 weeks. I did go to Mass General. I live in Massachusetts a couple days ago. I'd made this appointment months ago to see neurology out there for the POTS thing. I tell them the whole story. They're basically like, yeah, we hear this story every day. There's a lot of people dealing with this, There's no magic pill. Like, we can give you this medication that might help some of the POTS and the adrenaline surges. We can... there's other things you can do, breathing exercises, meditation, which I try all of that. I should do it more, but it's hard when it's a lot. It's a lot to do, to stay on top of the diet, the acupuncture, the therapy. Like, I'm lucky that I'm able to do it. But, you just have to remain optimistic. So I did start taking the spike protein detox recently, because at this point I'm in month 12, and I'm just throwing every possible thing I can at it. So that's the story, guys. That's where I'm at today. I watch a lot of YouTube videos. There's some great ones out there. Adam, that I told you about. There's another one, Life with Kyle. He's got a lot of good videos. There's another one too, Long COVID, Roberto Escobar. He talks about the polyvagal theory. Like, this is what he says cured him, doing a lot of the breathing work. So as disciplined as I've been in the stuff I'm doing, I know that there's another level I can go to and start doing the breathing and some light exercise. It's just been hard when you don't know how you're going to feel every day. I have days when even now lately, my legs have been so tired. But I'll have days where I feel good, and then you want to rush and do everything that you're missing out on and go here and go there, but it kind of bites you the next day or two, which they talk about pacing and all this kind of stuff. But I remain optimistic. That's all we can do. I mean, I talk to a lot of people in the long COVID groups on Facebook, and everybody's out there just trying to help each other. But it's a real thing. It's definitely a real thing. I pray. I always say, listen, when you try to express it to people, and listen, everyone's got their own battles. I get it. But I tell them, hey, listen, I hope you never, ever have to experience this. But the only way you really understand it is if you're experiencing it, like anything else. So thank you guys for tuning in. That's my story. Please feel free to share and comment and reach out. I always try to connect with people, and we're all just kind of like taking stuff out of each other's playbooks and seeing what works. And obviously the common denominator in most stories is time. We just don't know how much time it'll take. So stay optimistic, stay strong if you're going through this. Reach out. You're not going crazy, even though it feels like you are. And just do what you can, do what you can with what's available to you. I pray for anybody going through this, and hopefully they come out with more research soon and see if they can kind of turn this around for people. God bless. Have a great night.